It is Friday, January 20th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone. As usual, let's start off with our PS Plus reminder. The January PS Plus Essential Games are still live, so claim those. Get that done. Also, PS Plus Extra and Premium, those games are now live on PSN as well, so go check those out. But really, one of the big stories from this past week is PSVR2, because Sony recently confirmed more launch games, or rather launch window games. So they've been very conservative on their wording about this. They don't want to, commit to exactly what is day one, but we can already see that a lot of these are hitting day one. But just a lot of PSVR2 news, and thus far we've talked about how PSVR2's launch lineup has looked kind of okay, nothing fantastic, but so far it seems like it's kind of a hard sell for what is going to be a very expensive headset. But now I don't know if that's entirely true. It's looking much better. So first we can say that Gran Turismo 7, that VR mode, it's not a mode. It is the full game, which is very exciting. That was the one little caveat that we were unsure about because they didn't confirm it right away. If it was going to be like GT Sports, kind of small, half-baked VR mode. It's the full game. All races, you can play online in VR. The only thing you can't do is split screen races, which, makes sense, but otherwise the full game is there with foveated rendering and eye tracking as well. So that is awesome to hear. And Sony basically confirmed about 14 new launch lineup games or launch window games. 14 is what I'm counting. They say 13 depending on where you look, but really it's like 12 because they're also throwing Kayak VR on there. So not to split hairs, but I'm trying to keep count on like what's actually new here. But it seems like there's 14 new games that were recently confirmed for, again, that launch window. So let's go over those titles. First is Before Your Eyes. This was a PC and mobile game released back in 2021, but it's a game that makes use of eye tracking to advance its plot, and that's coming March 10th for PSVR 2. Next is Pavlov. This is a very popular PC VR shooter, and it's not that watered-down MetaQuest version. It's the PC release coming to PSVR 2, and it will be on time for launch day, February 22nd, and it should also have crossplay as well. Then there's Puzzling Places. This is that 3D jigsaw puzzle game that released about a year ago, and that's also getting a free upgrade for PSVR 2 on launch day. Song in the Smoke Rekindled. This is another game getting a free upgrade if you already own it on PSVR, but it's a single-player survival action adventure game. Actually kind of long for a VR title. It takes like 10-15 hours to get through it. Synth Riders Remastered Edition, another free upgrade from PSVR, and all DLC purchased is carried over as well. Thumper, this one is, from what I can see, it does not offer a upgrade path, so you may have to pay for this one again. But obviously, if you're just walking into this thing brand new, then this is a new game to you. But this was a PSVR launch game years ago, and it's a really creepy but sort of mesmerizing rhythm game. NFL Pro Era is next. This is the first fully licensed NFL VR game, and it kind of came out recently, so this is also getting a PSVR 2 version. No upgrade is available from what I can see, but it's a launch window game. Next is What the Bat. Basically, this is a slapstick comedy where you have bats for hands and you participate in the absurdity of that kind of situation, but it looks funny. So that's coming. Res Infinite, this is another PSVR game that was a launch title getting a PSVR 2 version. It'll utilize eye tracking so you can aim at enemies, and there's also the haptic feedback support as well. And this one will set you back $10 as an upgrade fee if you are a current owner. Same situation for Tetris Effect Connected. So that's a $10 upgrade, but this is a high-fidelity PSVR 2 version arriving on launch day, and it will also include eye tracking support. Next is Creed Rise to Glory Championship Edition. This entry has new modes, content, and settings to make it a more personalized experience. This version is also going to have a reworked online PvP mode with improved matchmaking and cross-platform play coming March 3rd. The Last Clockwinder. This was a really well-received VR game from last year. It's a puzzle automation game that is a bit hard to describe until you're in there understanding what it's going for, but this will arrive on day one as well. And then Job Simulator and Vacation Simulator, I believe this was recently confirmed. Before it was kind of assumed, but they are confirmed for launch day, so these two games kind of go hand in hand because they're so well known, and, well, Job Simulator at least certainly is. It's a quintessential VR title that's so easy and fun to get into. I think a lot of people know this game, but anyway, these are getting free PSVR 2 versions on launch day. and that's awesome. So that means the current total, because at least the image that Sony put out there shows 37 games. But here's the other weird thing, is that Sony's been, you know, kind of careful on saying launch window games, but there's a lot of these are going to hit launch. And that is not even the full list. So I've been keeping track on the games that are getting announced, and I'm obviously going to miss, you know, a few titles here and there, but my last count was like 44, 46, somewhere around there, right? There's a lot more that's getting announced constantly, and I think there's going to be even more on launch day as well. So by and large, this is looking substantially better. And I mean, it was already like okay. I mean, it's not like it was terrible per se. We already knew about, you know, Resident Evil Village, Horizon Call of the Mountain. I mean, those are cool. Moss Book 2, right? So there was stuff there. It's just, it didn't seem like there was much else beyond that. But, and, you know, yes, we don't have Half-Life Alyx yet. I would hope that that's going to come eventually. No Astrobot or like other PSVR classics, Blood and Truth getting a PSVR 2 version. So yes, there's certainly a case to be made that there's a lot more that we're still missing. But I mean, when we're talking about nearly 30 something games on day one, and let's say we're getting up to 45 within a month, that's a lot of variety to choose from. There's a lot of really good stuff here. I mean, we're talking about not just Horizon and RE Village, but, you know, now you've got the full Gran Turismo 7 experience, The Last Clockwinder, The Dark Picture Switchback, Pavlov, Tetris Effect. And I certainly also understand the case of, and the PS5 sees a lot of this as well when it comes to criticism or really current gen systems in total, which is just how many, you know, ports, remasters, remakes that we see often nowadays. And, you know, I certainly get that. There's always this sort of seeking validation of why would I buy, you know, product X, Y, and Z unless I can only get something there. And, you know, it's not like that doesn't make sense. It's just that nowadays there's the consequence of these systems being so principally similar to one another, especially from the outgoing ones, that's why we see so many ports nowadays. But I would always, you know, make the argument that if you have not played the game before, then it really doesn't matter when it was made available, right? So at least in the case of the VR space, where, you know, I think exclusivity is not nearly as important. I mean, just pick your preferred headset, and that's kind of where you can choose to play most of these games. So, you know, if you've never played Thumper or Res Infinite or Tetris Effect, the job simulators, you know, Moss Book 1 and 2, I mean, Pavlov, these are, now you've got a really good premium high-grade headset to play these games on, and they're going to be there on day one. So I just think there's a lot more compelling reasons now to maybe seriously consider this headset. And if you're already kind of like into the VR space, I think you are more or less signed up. It really is that kind of that divergent path thing, right? Where some are a bit curious about VR, but it's just such a expensive ask, and that, you know, that's totally valid. But then there's, you know, folks that are in the VR space, and it's just kind of like you like this stuff no matter what, so you were probably on board already before hearing this updated launch window list. But I would say that right now, there's a lot of compelling cases to be made to maybe get this thing versus what we were hearing really less than, 2 months ago. So it's looking substantially better, I would say. Moving on to our next news story, we've got some sales data for games being sold in the US throughout all of 2022. So this is ranked on dollar sales, not necessarily units sold, but in terms of dollar sales, this is via Matt Piscatella, the executive director and analyst at the NPD Group. So we saw the top 20 best-selling games by dollar sales ranked in the US, and we can see that number 1 was Modern Warfare 2, number 2 is Elden Ring, 3, Madden NFL 23, not too surprising, but God of War Ragnarok number 4, I don't know if that's surprising per se. I mean, clearly the game did well, but it's always impressive to see an exclusive that launched so late into the year chart that high. Also, Horizon Forbidden West, number 9. I feel like so many seem to think that game did not do well, but it certainly did, and it's still selling consistently, which is nice to see, because I'm always very vocal about how much I enjoyed that game. Also, dipping past the top 10, we've got Gran Turismo 7 at number 13. That one is actually a bit surprising to me. I thought that would have done a bit better. Gran Turismo typically has some a very large audience. That game normally does quite well, but it's also got a lot of legs that I think might outpace games like Horizon or God of War. So Gran Turismo should slowly climb in terms of overall sales. Now, if we break this down to purely PlayStation platforms, games that were only sold on PS4, PS5, then pretty much all these go up a bit more. So God of War Ragnarok was the number 2 best-selling game, beating Elden Ring. Again, this is based on dollar sales, though. Number 5 was Horizon Forbidden West, and number 8, Gran Turismo 7, and we can also see that number 10, this is where Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales creeped in as well. So always fun to occasionally go over some sales data, and at least here in the US, these games are consistently doing well. Sometimes we look at the UK's GfK data sales, and that's where, that was like a running thing with, more PS5 stock going to the UK. We almost always saw first-party PlayStation games chart back up every single week, but it's a similar story where these games placed reasonably well considering that they are exclusives. Moving on to our next story, we have a very brief update on the rumored PS5 detachable disk drive model coming sometime this year, around September. This is again coming from the only source really about this thing, which is Tom Henderson writing for InsiderGaming.com. This time it was a small update on Twitter where he said there's going to be no major hardware changes for this console, and his other bullet point on there is that it's not likely that the detachable disk drive will be supported for the current digital edition console, which I don't think is really too surprising. I mean, we certainly theorized, based on how it looks and the mechanism of where it attaches, and the first report was he mentioned that there's an extra USB-C on the back and you would plug it in that way, but there's also some kind of you presume a clicking mechanism to make sure it's snug and it looks like it's not going to detract away from the console design, which is also what we're hearing. But just based on how it looks and how it's going to connect, I'm sure folks are going to try and mess with it and get it to work on an original digital edition console. I mean, we saw that with some trying to use OEM Blu-ray drives on PS5 to try and add it to a current model, which it just doesn't work, obviously. So I mean, it seems clear that it's probably not going to retroactively, it's not going to be a retrofit to the current model. But I am still very curious as to what this thing is going to look like. So what does he mean by no major hardware changes? So we're not expecting PS5 Pro, not even a minor little upgrade there, which sometimes that does happen in the console space, like a bump to memory, or sometimes Vita got 1 gigabyte of onboard storage, things like that sometimes happen. Outside of that, though, I want to know what it looks like. Is this going to be our typical chassis redesign, a slim, proper, smaller PlayStation 5? They've gotten this console down by a considerable amount when it comes to just the internals. I mean, they've removed a lot of components, or rather they were able to shrink them down, making the console lighter to ship, which is good for Sony's bottom line, because the less it weighs, the cheaper it is to ship. So, I mean, this has got to be something where they want to get it as small as possible. Also getting the packaging down smaller as well, right? So, and that's why they're doing this thing to begin with. Manufacturing one console model, also doing the separate disk drive attachment, streamlining production, making it smaller in theory, making it cheaper to ship, and just that's how it's going to work for their bottom line. They want to make it more profitable. But I mean, the thing is, he did say that they're going to start manufacturing in April for a release around September of this year. Now, if they're going to start manufacturing it in April, I'm telling you, this is why it was a prediction for me. I mean, we're going to see this thing before Sony's ready to talk about it, whether it's from Tom or usually when these things go on the production line, that's when we get some sort of leak or photos start coming out. So we are going to see this thing before Sony officially reveals it. And typically what Sony does here is they don't ever actually talk about it until they're ready to ship it to stores within 1 or 2 weeks, or sometimes they just say, and it's available now. A lot of companies do that, so we'll see how this one plays out, but that's what we're hearing so far. Next up, we have a confirmed release date for Returnal on PC. It's coming February 15th, so not too much longer of a wait. And Sony also put out a new video showing off some of the expected enhancements for the PC version. So the typical bells and whistles of NVIDIA DLSS support, also AMD FSR, ultra wide. You can do ray tracing for shadows and reflections, which the PS5 version does not have. Also, it supports Dolby Atmos, DualSense support, and on the PS blog, they also outlined a more thorough breakdown of the recommended specs for this game, which the 32 gigabytes of memory is really only for the higher end specs. So for the epic and ray tracing settings. That was something we brought up before, how the 32 gig minimum seemed a bit unusual, but you can play the game with 16 definitely. Although at the absolute minimum, an SSD is preferred, despite an HDD being an option with 60 gigabytes being reserved on that drive. But still, I mean, we saw that Forspoken also had really weird recommended PC specs, so this might be a trend with PC releases for some of these games that on the surface may not look that demanding, but you know, like we said, based on how these games are made on these current gen consoles, where they're not they've got this headroom where they're not, you know, shipping these games on last generation consoles, there might be a weird divergence when it comes to the PC recommended specs. But even on the low end, you can still usually get in there with a very modest but totally serviceable system. Now let's get into The Last of Us HBO, because wow, did this show debut in a very big way. So 4.7 million viewers on the first episode on day one, which was HBO's second biggest debut since 2010, and it was only beaten by the House of the Dragon, which was, I mean, it wasn't even close with that one. That had nearly 10 million viewers. That's an existing well-known property from, you know, one of HBO's biggest shows ever. So I don't think they were going to have much of a shot at beating that. But number two with 4.7 on day one was pretty impressive. And since Wednesday, the updated figure was over 10 million viewers or somewhere around there, but they did really well. And I mean, you can see how they're going to capitalize on this, because now on PSN for PlayStation Plus premium users, you can have a trial for The Last of Us Part 1. You can play up to 2 hours. So that game, I'm sure, is going to start doing reasonably well as the show advances on a weekly basis, because we keep hearing that later episodes are even nuttier. The thing is, and I mentioned before, like I was just waiting to get my living room done, so I wasn't able to watch it right away. I only just recently got my couch. I've been in this place for like 2-3 weeks and did not have a couch in the living room, and I've got a bigger TV down there, so that's what I was waiting for. But episode 1, wow, my mother really really enjoyed it, and she's not a video game person, but she like loves zombie stuff, right? She likes you know, any sort of zombie media, and she just likes the gore of it. But like she like loved it so much she actually watched the first episode a second time, and she's like, oh my god, it's amazing. So she had a great time with it. I mean, this show is going to reach a lot of people that, you know, don't even know or care much about video games at all, and really, how could they not reach that many people, because they play ads for this show like constantly. But it seems like so far this was a really big, you know, a really big success for what is adapting a video game series into TV. Now, while we're talking about The Last of Us HBO, we can also say that a very interesting piece came up from the Los Angeles Times, and that was about the show, the game, you know, Neil's involvement, Craig Mazin, but also Bruce Straley, the original co-director with Neil on the game back in 2013. Bruce, of course, left in 2016 after Uncharted 4, and since then he's, you know, talked about how his relationship with Naughty Dog is a bit strained, and so there's a very brief, you know, part of this piece where he talks about how he was not credited at all on the show. And I'm not entirely sure if the context here implies he was, you know, he wanted a proper writing credit, which I would assume you would not get if you're not, you know, writing on the show. I mean, the show is different from the game, obviously. It's a different product entirely, but some sort of nod or credit somewhere in there. You would expect Bruce would be on there, but he's not. So he delivered this quote to the Los Angeles Times, where he says, "It's an argument for unionization that someone who is part of the co-creation of that world and those characters isn't getting a credit or a nickel for the work they put into it. Maybe we need unions in the video game industry to be able to protect creators." So it's interesting that this quote is coming out now and just this kind of one isolated thing, because I think that's the one way to look at it, as, you know, you would have this situation of Bruce not talking much or being too active until The Last of Us show comes out, and this is the one thing he says, that, oh, I don't have any credits on the show, and I think now we should have some unions. But obviously there's no context or background in how he's ever felt about unions, or, because he's not in the public eye too often, although he did recently start a new studio that we haven't heard much about, right? Because it's a new studio, so they're probably very busy working on that until they have something to show. But there's one way to look at this if you know, just based on how we haven't heard from Bruce in a while, and this is the one thing we heard. Having said that, there's been some advancements lately when it comes to unions in the video game industry. I mean, most companies in any sector, I mean, they don't want to support unions publicly. They'll either be completely neutral and say, oh, we're fine with unions. If our workers want to do it, they can do it. But, you know, we see how that typically goes, where companies will be very predatory towards those employees if they do try to organize. So they're either fairly neutral but can be insidious on how they approach it, or they can outright say they are against unions, or really something where you have executives at those companies be outspoken about them, and that sort of is a reflection of how the company may or may not feel about it. But the point is, you know, unions have not been a thing in the games business until very recently, with Microsoft having to be more of a public friend for unions because they want the Activision Blizzard deal to go through, right? So that's where they were working with the one organization in the U.S. to get their approval, the union organization. I can't remember it right now, but you know, they're being very public about how they support them now, and that led to the organization of 300 plus QA workers at ZeniMax Media, which is, you know, a big deal. So that might be the sort of like the seal being broken there, right? Perhaps we will see more of this. And it, you know, at least in the context of the whole credit situation with like what Bruce is bringing up, there's been so many situations lately, and I've seen it on Twitter a lot, where like somebody will, you know, put 6 months to maybe less than a year at a studio, work on a game, but that's not enough to be credited in the game. And sometimes it's something where you have to be there for the entire project, and it's shipping to be in the credits, which is a really weird, bizarre practice. If you worked on something, it doesn't matter what capacity to how much you worked on it or how long you worked on it, you should be in the credits. It's sort of a full stop, like no argument thing, but that's just how the games industry has been. It's been like that for a long time. So, you know, in that case, a union would help, obviously. But it's a very complex conversation that we can't spend too much time on right now. But at least in this, you know, situation, you've got somebody quite notable in the games business saying that, hey, maybe we should start looking at this seriously. Next up, we finally have a brand new PlayStation mobile game coming out, and it's not entirely new, so that's where this already gets a little bit weird. This came out like over a year ago. It's called Ultimate Sackboy, which is another Sackboy like endless runner game on mobile, and it's a new game. It's not Run Sackboy Run. It is different, but it came out like a year ago as a soft launch. It was based on your region and if it was available or not. It was, you know, kind of a weird thing, but now it's got a wide release planned for February 21st, and it's just weird how they're doing this, because it's kind of like Wipeout Rush, where it's a PlayStation property, obviously, but this does not seem to fall in line with this like new PlayStation mobile initiative that Sony is doing, right? Like they talked about their acquisition of Savage Game Studios, and they put that on the PS blog. They, you know, outlined clearly that they're forming a new division and it's going to be, you know, its own thing. And I don't think Wipeout Rush or this game fall under that category, but it kind of has to some degree. They're clearly PlayStation properties that they're contracting out to do this stuff. So I'm not sure why they're not like maybe making this more well known. Like, why are there no tweets from official PlayStation channels? Why is there nothing on Instagram, Twitter, no trailers on the official PlayStation YouTube channel? I don't get how they're doing this. Is it something where they don't want to throw, you know, mobile games at an audience that may not necessarily want it? Do they want these games to grow organically to a mobile audience? You know, perhaps that is what they're doing, but it strikes me as weird that they're not, you know, it seems like there's a very obvious difference between what's going to fall under PlayStation Studios mobile, and then there's these other games that maybe aren't quite in the same category, you know what I mean? Let's move on to some rumors here. We've got a few that are just kind of all in the same general area, so we'll do them all now. But we've got the snitch on Twitter, well, recently retired and not on Twitter, but now on Discord. This is where he provided a new leak where it's not a leak directly from him, like how he was originally getting his leaks, because again, I think he just must have lost access to seeing YouTube videos before they go live. So I think that's like truly cut off. But he apparently had a reliable source inform him that PlayStation has some third-party stuff to announce very soon, and that's the only way that they phrased it. And this is apparently not in reference to the PS VR2 games that were recently revealed. So maybe there's something more coming soon, which I think that's kind of in relation to this next rumor, which is the Metal Gear Solid rumors. There's been a lot lately about the series returning in some way, and depending on where you look for this stuff, you either hear about an MGS1 remake and then a bunch of remasters, or it's an MGS3 remake and then it's remasters for the other one, which the most plausible and credible one from at least different sources all saying the same thing is that it's an MGS3 remake at Virtuos. And really we're getting remasters of 1 and 2, although recently Area Hugones, that site, which has been kind of reliable, they've had some scoops, nothing major as far as I can see, but they recently updated an article about an MGS remake coming soon, and it's going to be announced, I guess, by May. So essentially some kind of Metal Gear Solid remake or remaster. I don't know how they're phrasing it either. There's just obviously it's a very gray area right now, but essentially they're expecting something to be announced by May. And then also recently on Twitter we had Raiden's voice actor responding to somebody in a thread about Metal Gear Rising, and they said, and I quote, "Stay tuned for things to be announced in the coming weeks." So something's happening, and we know that Konami is, I mean, they've been forward about it. You know, they're bringing back a lot of these properties. Silent Hill finally had its formal, transmission live stream, so we saw all that stuff finally. Now it's more a matter of Castlevania and Metal Gear, and at least when we're talking about PlayStation, we know that Sony likes to do a lot of agreements. So, I mean, when it comes to a franchise like Metal Gear Solid, it would not surprise me at all if Sony was trying to get involved with whatever sort of projects Konami has lined up. So based on these rumors, we'll see what eventually gets revealed, but it would not surprise me at all if Sony has a role to play here. Now, speaking of third-party deals, we can also mention Forspoken, which is coming out very soon. And, well, this happens often with games coming out, which is that it's leaking online prior to it officially launching. So the first hours on YouTube, you can go watch it. There's a lot of stuff coming out each day. We're going to see more and more about the game, but we can say that the review embargo lifts on Monday, so one day before it comes out. And it does seem like the game, based on the demo, which recently got patched for some quality of life improvements, I mean, it's flawed in many ways, but there's some merit to the experience. I think, the game's probably going to fall in the 60 to 70 range on Metacritic. Maybe it'll review worse, I don't know, but I wouldn't say it's a bad game, but it clearly has some issues that are going to dock it pretty good when it comes to its critical reception, which is not going to look very good for Square, but this is a pretty big high-profile release for Square and also PlayStation, where it's a PS5 exclusive. So coming out soon. Hopefully it doesn't do too bad. I always wanted to be optimistic about the game and see the good parts of it. But when it comes to what is going to be such a crowded Q1, I think it's going to be tough for this game to really find a big audience. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it's so simple. You can follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those were all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all. And our Tuesday video was looking at the PS Studios lineup, so internal studios, external, rumors. I mean, we do this stuff every week on LTPS, but if you want a full portfolio breakdown, the most up-to-date info, then that was our Tuesday video. And of course, another upload on Tuesday as always, this coming Tuesday, I should say. But that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.